Friends, peace be with you. This talk, entitled Who Are the Warmongers, is divided into two parts. The first part will focus upon the regional dimension of war. And the second part will talk about the global dimension. So, first part, regional dimension. And the region we're talking about is West Asia. Who are the warmongers in West Asia? The impression given by the media, by the Israeli elite, the American elite, is that the warmongers are Iran and its allies. They're the warmongers. This is a blatant lie. It is a falsehood which has been perpetuated for a long while. Let us really reflect on this. Who are the warmongers in West Asia? If you look at West Asia, after the Second World War, since 1945, for the last 80 years, it is obvious that the primary cause of wars, of conflicts, of bloodshed, the primary cause is Israel. And this is the truth that we should all recognize. Otherwise, we will continue to be deceived and duped by the mainstream media and, of course, the Israeli and American elites and others who support them. Why do we say that it is Israel that is the main cause of all the conflicts that have taken place in West Asia? Beginning with the creation of Israel in 1948, which led to a war. Why did it lead to a war? Because the people of West Asia, the Arabs, both Arab Christians and Arab Muslims, were not prepared to accept the imposition of Israel upon the region. That is what had happened. The Jews, as a people, were living amongst the Arabs, the Christians and the Muslims for a long, long while. There was no problem. There was a land called Palestine, made up of Jews, Christian Arabs, Muslim Arabs mainly, and others. It was a multi-ethnic, multi-religious land. And they lived in relative harmony, in peace. There was no major conflict amongst them, though there were some skirmishes here and there, but generally, Palestine was peaceful. What changed all this? What changed all this was the British idea of creating a Jewish home for the Jews, exclusive Jewish homeland in Palestine. That was the beginning of all the problems. And this idea was contained in a letter from Lord Balfour, the British Foreign Secretary, to Lord Rothschild, the leader of the Jews in Europe, in 1917. Very famous or infamous letter. In the letter, the British promised the Jews that they'll try to help them establish an exclusive Jewish homeland in Palestine. It was a very mischievous idea, typical of the British colonizers. Why? Because the British knew there was a land called Palestine, made up of different religious communities, different ethnic groups. And suddenly you talk about wanting to create an exclusive homeland for the Jews. it was bound to lead to conflict. And this, in a sense, is what the British have done everywhere. Whenever they are faced with situations like this, multi-ethnic societies, communities, peoples, and so on, they'll divide, split them, try to dominate them, try to exploit them, rule over them. This is what the British have done all along. So this is part of the British pattern of colonial rule: divide and rule, divide and dominate. And this idea of an exclusive Jewish homeland, at the beginning there wasn't much support, even among the Jews. A few, of course, supported the idea. But it was a trickle. What changed it was what happened in Europe. The Nazi massacre of the Jews, the Nazi Holocaust, that changed everything. The moment that happened, there was a great deal of sympathy for the Jews in Europe and in North America. And people began to argue vigorously that they should have an exclusive homeland to prevent things like this from happening. And so quite a lot of people supported this idea in Europe. Other parts of the world, they were not bothered, but just in Europe and in North America. They pushed for this idea, and since the United Nations was established in 1945, was dominated by Western nations, including countries of the United States and Britain and so on. They pushed for this idea, used the UN to create the State of Israel in 1948. This exclusive Jewish state. And of course, the Arabs didn't accept it. They wanted to divide Palestine, these colonizers. They said, all right, we will give the larger part of Palestine, the bigger portion geographically, to the Jews, and a smaller part to the Arabs. But in terms of numbers, population size, the Arabs were much, much bigger in terms of numbers than the Jews. The Jews in 1917, at the time of the Balfour Declaration, were about 10% of the total population. That's all, just 10%. And so the Jews accepted this idea. It was in their interest. But the Arabs turned it down. And then that led to a conflict, a war. And of course, we know that in the midst of that conflict, the Jewish state of Israel, they expelled a lot of the Palestinians. Huge, massive expulsion. Something like 750,000 were expelled in order to create the state of Israel. And that continued for a while. There was a war, expulsion and all that. And it happened again later in 1967, the Six-Day War, where again what the state of Israel did was to gobble up more land for themselves because they won that war. And so Israel expanded. In 1948, they constituted 78% of the original Palestine, 78% in 1948. But when 67 war took place, they increased their percentage from 78% to the whole of Palestine. The remaining 22% also they gobbled up. That's the West Bank, Gaza, and so on. They took over those territories. In other words, they were in total control. And that led to a war and killings and so on. And right through, the Arab population has not been happy with this situation. And the Jews, to make matters worse, became even more dominant, even more aggressive, even more oppressive. So what they did was, the Jews, they established a system of apartheid in Israel. That is the only way they could rule over the Arabs, because the Arabs were the majority. So what they did was to establish a system of apartheid which gave them all the power that you can think of, and the Arabs became second-class citizens, victims of the system of apartheid. And that it continued, which was the cause of many other conflicts, because that itself was an injustice, creating an apartheid system to rule. And then after 67, we had the 73 war, which was again the same root problem, the problem of Israel. Israel, which didn't belong to that region because it was exclusive. Israel, which oppressed the others. Israel, which marginalized the people, the original people of the land, and therefore created a lot of unhappiness and anger. And after 73, there were other skirmishes here and there, and that brings us to what is happening now. We have this situation today where Israel attacked Iran. They attacked Iran on the 13th of June, 2025. And Iran, of course, responded to it a day later on the 14th of June. And why did Israel attack Iran? Which is the other important point we have to remember. They attacked Iran because they felt that Iran was the only stumbling block to their total dominance of the region. That was the reason, no other reason. Iran refused to accept Israel as it is. Mind you, Iran had no problem with the Jews, no problem with the Jews. In fact, there is a big Jewish minority in Iran to this day, living in Iran. They have a member of parliament who is Jewish. They have rights as a minority in Iran. So it is not a question of the Jews. This is not the problem. And the Iranians, the Muslims, the Christians, they've had no problem with the Jews as such. What they could not accept is this idea of an exclusive state created at expense of this multi-religious, multi-ethnic state called Palestine. This is the root cause. So we have to realize this. When people talk about wars in West Asia and so on, the main cause of the wars is the creation of Israel that have led to all these wars that have not ended and will not end unless and until, very important point, unless and until the Jews, Israel, Zionism, they accept the rights of the Palestinians, which they don't want to. They don't accept the idea of a Palestinian state. They don't accept the rights of the Palestinians as a people. All they want to do is to continue to oppress them and to marginalize them. And this is why there will not be any peace in that region as long as the attitude of the Zionist state, its elites, and the US that backs Israel, as long as that attitude doesn't change. That is the root problem. And we have to recognize that instead of talking about all sorts of other things which are nonsensical, that all the wars are due to Israel and so on, which is rubbish. All the wars have been due to Israel. Let's understand that. And that will bring us to the next topic we'll talk about later in another video. Thank you.